Hey guys, tonight you step off a rutted road and into a doorway where lantern smoke hangs like low clouds and someone's haggling, of all things, for half a pillow. The floor is sticky with ale. The threshold is a shallow swamp of mud and melted wax. Voices crowd your ears, pilgrims muttering prayers, a carter counting coins, a woman laughing like a bell you can almost see. You squeeze through, damp cloak clinging, and it hits you that if you're hoping for a private room, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the map of our little midnight convoy light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The inn yawns open ahead, a timbered belly lit by tallow flames that sputter and complain. You move with the tide of travelers, shoes churring on rushes scattered to hide spills and other stories. A dog is curled in an unconvincing circle by the hearth, one eye open, the universal security system of medieval lodging. Overhead, beams are tattooed with soot. A signboard outside, painted with a pomegranate, because lettering isn't trusted, still swings in the wind you bring in with you. A hostler ducks past with a hay-sweet smell, meaning horses are stabled not far, perhaps right behind this wall, which explains the low thunder of hooves as someone settles down for the night. You think, if the beds are as close to the stable as the ale is to the arguments, you'll be sleeping with a lullaby of snorts and snuffles, cozy in a farmyard sort of way. You catch snatches of barter, a silver penny for a corner space on a straw mattress, 2 buttons and a promise to keep watch for a pallet by the fire. No receipts, only witnesses and memory, which is why everyone negotiates loud enough for 10 neighbors. Someone proudly announces they have a pilgrim badge from Canterbury, as if that badge doubles as a loyalty card. A carter, wetter than the weather, shrugs off his cloak and turns it into a blanket where he stands. You learn quickly that here the currency isn't just coin, it's favors, stories, and the reliable skill of snoring softly. If you can manage that last one, you're already a premium guest. A mainstream fact floats up in the steam of breath and ale. Medieval towns frequently rang a curfew bell after dusk. Couvre-feu, cover the fire, urging households to bank their hearths and shutter flames. When that bell tolled, streets emptied, doors barred, and inns like this one became bright islands in a black sea. One of the few places you could legally be awake and indoors if you weren't already home. That's why the doorway feels like a checkpoint. Inside is warmth, beer, and a bed-shaped hope. Outside is cold, fines, and whoever's decided to try your purse strings. The bell is long past, which explains the urgency. You're late to the raft. You slide toward the hearth to dry your edges and smell the news. Wet wool, onion broth, horse, spice, and a mystery note that might be lavender or might be optimism. On a bench, 2 men clear a space barely the size of honesty and motion you in. You perch. The innkeeper, eyes like bright nails, counts heads with the speed of a tacksman at Lent. Every nod means someone gets to lie down. Your name doesn't matter. Your shape, whether you snore, whether you kick, those things matter. A boy, probably an apprentice, ferries trenchers of stew and, more importantly, ferry boats of gossip. The loft is full. The long bed in the corner has room for half a body if the legs are polite. The truckle, one of those little underbeds, might be yours if you can fold like laundry. You test your knees and decide you're extremely foldable tonight. A quirky tidbit sidles in with the boy. Some inns keep bundles of dried hops and sweet herbs tucked under the bedding, not because it turns straw into a feather bed, but because it pretends to. The scent throws a blanket over what the straw can't hide. If you squint your nose, you might even call it spa-like. A generous spa. A spa with opinions. The dog approves, sneezing twice as if to bless the arrangement. Near the back, a pilgrim lifts his scallop shell and proposes sharing a half bed, that is, with whoever will trade him one warm spot for two fresh miracle stories by morning. You feel your skepticism blink, then grin. In this crowd, a warm spot is a miracle already. Historians still argue whether most travelers of modest means truly relied on inns like this, or more often found lodging in the spare beds and floors of private households along their route. What you see tonight is that, on the road itself, when weather turns the world to soup, an inn becomes a magnet, and you become iron filings pulled to its light. The innkeeper returns, measuring you with a glance that knows exactly how many ells of blanket you'll steal when asleep. 2 to a tick by the hearth, she says, meaning the straw mattress nearest the fire invites a partnership you didn't know you were seeking. The word stranger softens at the edges in a room like this. Warmth edits vocabulary. You nod. You can do this. You can share space like a seasoned sailor shares a bunk, and if your bedfellow sings in his sleep, you'll call it a lullaby. You have always wanted live entertainment included. Around you, the choreography continues. Boots lined like soldiers, cloaks hung where sparks can't gossip with them, candles snuffed under cups. Someone mutters a prayer that covers a lot of ground. Fire, thieves, aches, and questionable roommates. Another person spreads a folded cloak on the pallet, and with a sigh that could mend fences, lies down. The dog rotates 1 degree toward the heat. The inn's bones creak as if settling its own weight among so many dreams. You work out your plan. Pack under the pillow, dagger under the pack, head toward the wall, face the room. It's not paranoia, it's etiquette. The rules here are older than paint and obvious as splinters. Don't hoard blanket, don't hog the fire, don't argue with a sleepy miller. You loosen your belt, undo your boots, and your day finally unclenches. The rain keeps time on the shutters, the chimney sings a long, low vowel, and the bed you don't yet own waits just at the edge of consent. Somewhere beyond the door, the road silvering with puddles remembers you. In here, the world shrinks to lamp halos and the small negotiations of tired people trying to fit. You draw a breath, taste smoke and stew, and accept the bargain of the night. There will be a stranger, there will be a bed, and there will be enough of both to make morning possible. You find out fast that the arithmetic here isn't about rooms, it's about rectangles of sleep. The innkeeper's ledger, more imagined than written, divides a mattress the way a baker divides a loaf. By slices, by need, by how many hungry faces stare at it. Price per sleeping place, not per chamber. Pair 2 bodies to a tick, and suddenly the house keeps its candles, its cook, and its roof. You didn't come for a math lesson, but the numbers nudge your ribs. If 1 bed earns for 2, the hearth keeps breathing, and the stew keeps agreeing to be dinner. You look at the long bed by the wall and realize it's less furniture than revenue stream. A warm, lumpy spreadsheet with blankets. Coins clatter, and you learn the going rates by osmosis. A shared straw pallet near the hearth. cheapest. A spot on the long communal bed, middling. With the risk of an adventurous snorer. A space on a feather tick with a curtain, dear, and already promised to someone who can pronounce their saints in Latin. You can almost see the sliding scale in the innkeeper's eyes. Closer to heat costs more, under a roof beam costs less, and anything with a door costs very, very much. Privacy is not a right. It is a luxury item displayed somewhere you can't afford to look at for too long. You pat your purse, and it coughs. A mainstream fact settles like dust on the rushes. In household inventories and wills, beds and bedding rank among the most valuable goods, often worth more than tables or tools. Feathers, flock, linen sheets. These are capital, not mere comfort, and an inn keeps that capital earning by filling every handspan of surface. That is why two strangers end up spooning around a shared economic truth. The bed must pay for itself nightly, or the house becomes an empty barn with stories. You glance at the innkeeper's hands, scarred from years of hauling ticks and hanging curtains, and think, this is accounting with muscles. You edge closer to the counter, a plank polished by elbows, and overhear the menu of extras. Blanket included, sheet if you pay, hot brick if you insist and promise not to scorch the ticking, stew if there's patience, ale if there's mercy. The innkeeper weighs your coins with a look. You get the sense she can smell copper through a glove. 2 to a place, she says, the same way millers say 1 in 10. It isn't cruelty, it's craft. Fuel is dear, candles dearer, and the person who keeps the accounts dearest of all. You respect the rule the way you respect gravity. A quirky tidbit pops like a seed over the fire. In the cheaper corners of travel, some people don't buy a bed so much as a penny of straw. A fresh armful thrown into a loft or a corridor. Cleanish and warmish if you're optimistic. You can picture the upgrade path. From floor straw to pallet to tick to feather bed with a curtain. Each rung priced and loudly praised by anyone who can afford to brag. Tonight you're in the middle of the ladder, which feels exactly like a ladder when your hip finds the slat. Still, you call it comfort, because compared to the rain outside, everything indoors is a poem. Your prospective bedfellow materializes with an apologetic grin and a nose that suggests a long history with the road. He offers terms in the local dialect of tired, head to foot, blanket shared, no elbow crimes, and an agreement that if one wakes for the midnight watch, the other guards the packs with the devotion of a saint. You shake on it. The economics of trust are part of the bill, though not itemized. Over at the hearth, someone pays in firewood, another in mending a hinge, a third with a rumor about the fair 2 towns over. Even the dog contributes by being reassuring and vaguely spherical. 5 stars for ambience, would boop again. Historians still argue whether formal inns like this were the default for ordinary travelers, or whether most people relied more on informal hospitality. Friends, fellow guildsmen, cousins of cousins, and unlicensed alehouses with a spare palate, reserving inns mainly for market towns and the fat seams of pilgrim roads. The debate hums under the rafters, while the practical answer snores. Tonight, with rain stitching the dark together and the curfew bell long gone, the inn is the only place selling rectangles of sleep at any price. You do some sums to make the bargain feel righteous. 2 people on 1 mattress trap twice the heat under the same blanket. Less fuel on the fire. Fewer trips to the woodpile. More coins left to buy new rushes and pay the brewer. The dog, hearing himself mentioned in the ledger of your thoughts, thumps his tail once and resettles as if billing for services rendered. Somewhere a door claps and the room drinks down the draft. Every face leans toward the flame as if tied to it by a string. Another fact, this one wearing a clerk's frown. Towns sometimes regulated hostelry, licensing innkeepers, fixing measures for ale, fining fraud. But price per bed rose and fell with weather, harvest, and custom. That's why it swells during fairs and shrinks in dead winters. That's why you caught a discount when you offered to help haul barrels. You have become, briefly, part of the staff, paid in future snores. Somewhere an apprentice marks you down in the secret book of useful people, right beside woman who knows how to quiet the miller and boy who can catch the cat. Your bed space is finally inked. Well, spoken loudly enough to count as ink. And your partner pats the tick as if introducing you to a reliable mule. You test the give. It sighs like a tired baker. Above, the curtain is more symbol than wall, but symbols matter. It says someone cared about drafts, and therefore about sleepers, and therefore about your coins. You fold your cloak to make a better pillow and discover a miracle. It is still damp enough to hold its shape, which is the only time dampness behaves helpfully. You declare it ergonomics and accept your degree. A small joke of the house. The apprentice offers you a candle stump, measured by how long you want to talk. You take the one labeled unlikely friendship, which looks optimistic but not delusional. Your bedfellow produces a pouch that smells faintly of hops, a sachet to sweeten the straw. The dog sneezes again. An unpaid critic. You set the candle where its drip can't offend the tick and practice the choreography of sharing. You turn, he turns, the curtain lifts, the night shrugs. If I snore, you whisper, consider it a lullaby in a minor key. He replies, only if you keep it in tempo. A fair contract. By the time the candle confesses most of its height, the room has balanced itself. Coin for straw, straw for sleep, sleep for coin again tomorrow. You feel the house counting softly, not like a miser but like a mother tallying heads at the table. 2 to a place, yes. 2 to keep the roof remembering its job. 2 to keep the stew pot honest. 2 to turn a bed from a private island into a little bridge that gets an entire road through the night. And you, a fraction become friend, turn into the blanket's curve and purchase, with breath and warmth, your share of morning. You learn fast that heat in this house is a public utility with one stubborn engine. A single hearth works like a second sun and everyone else's weather, drifting closer to catch its temper. It throws light bravely, but it gives out warmth like a cautious banker lends coin, mostly to the faithful who stand near and smile. The innkeeper understands this physics by bone memory. She banks the fire at dusk, nurses it after curfew, and rations logs the way a ship captain rations biscuits. Wood isn't background here, it is policy, budget, and bedtime, all glowing together behind an iron grate. You watch fuel move like treasure. An apprentice carries a split log as tenderly as a reliquary, while the dog rises to supervise. His job description includes morale and crumb collection. At the far end, a small brazier hums, fed with charcoal the color of old thunder. Temperature tilts across the room, ankles cool by the door, shoulders warming as you drift toward the flame. You and your new bedfellow trade a look and begin the ancient migration documented by natural philosophers as people edging nearer the warm thing. It's graceful, dignified, and only slightly competitive. A mainstream fact snaps and sparks in your head. In many medieval towns, wood and charcoal were measured, taxed, and sometimes rationed. Markets sold standardized faggot bundles, so an honest armful had a lawful price. Winters that turned mean tightened those rules, and bakers kept saint early hours because their ovens doubled as neighborhood heaters. An inn has to live inside that system, buying honest bundles and stretching them like pastry. Tonight the arithmetic is visible in the fire's small, thrifty hands, coaxing coals into usefulness the way a careful mother coaxes soup to feed one more mouth. That is where 2 to a bed becomes more than an accounting trick. It's a heat strategy. 2 sleepers under 1 blanket are a small furnace that refuels itself with breath. Bed curtains help too, turning a mattress into a tent that traps damp warmth and keeps out the drafts that stalk floors like hungry cats. You pull the curtain a handspan, and the air improves by a chapter. Somewhere near the hearth, the dog sneezes approvingly, which you accept as a passing grade in thermodynamics according to dog. Your nightcap, should you find one, is not fashion. It's insulation for thoughts. The house spends fuel through tiny rituals. A brick bakes in the coals, then gets wrapped in cloth and slipped to the foot of a bed. The medieval cousin of a heated blanket, with a touch more drama and just enough danger to keep everyone respectful. Cloaks steam on a rack that bows with history. The mist writes brief, ghostly sermons you pretend to read. A kettle lives close to the embers so dawn won't have to beg for a new flame. Your bedfellow produces knitted footings, half sock, half optimism, and calls them sleep shoes. You admire the branding and consider ordering a pair in Don't Wake the Miller gray. A quirky tidbit drifts in with a soft mineral tang. Where timber runs scarce, people burn peat cut from bogs, or even dried dung. The smoke tastes of old earth and old effort. The apprentice swears peat warms you twice, once when you cut it, once when you burn it, which is also how he explains most of his chores. He tries the joke on everyone until it sticks like soot. It does. You laugh, carefully, to avoid spending extra heat. The fire choreographs the inn's schedule. Stew simmers when the logs are bold. Bread toasts when the coals lie down. The final mugs of ale go to those willing to sit in cooler corners and call it refreshing with straight faces. When the fire is banked for the night, bodies take over the work. You and your partner arrange yourselves like dignified herringbone, lift the blanket to the same philosophical altitude, and discover the math of warmth. If 2 is good, 3 would be a sauna, which is why the dog keeps his professional distance. Even jokes lower their voices to keep the curtain from shivering. Another practical fact, older than the soot on the beams. Chimneys are not universal yet. Many buildings still keep an open central hearth with a louvered roof or a smoke hole. Rafters and lungs share the same varnish. Inns adopt chimneys earlier, when they can afford stonework, because a hooded fire draws better, smokes fewer soups, and preserves goodwill. You hear a low, drafty moan in the flue, proof of investment, and you silently thank whatever saint tends stinging eyes. Heat, comfort, and reputation ride the same current. If guests cry less, they pay more cheerfully. Historians still argue whether the cold biting your knuckles tonight is just ordinary winter or the early teeth of the so-called Little Ice Age, whether that long mood of chill pressed people into closer beds and thicker curtains sooner than memory admits. The timeline wobbles in the scholarship. The behavior does not. The human solution to weather is other humans. If you needed a philosophy of warmth, there it is, printed on linen and tied with a curtain cord. The innkeeper makes a last inspection, and ash drifts like quiet confetti as she tucks the fire into itself. She murmurs a rhyme about sparks and saints that doubles as a safety policy. Benches clear in waves toward the stair, toward the loft, toward pallets arranged like punctuation along the far wall. Boots line up with the discipline army's envy. Someone sets a candle stump in a saucer and names it "Good Night." You pocket the phrase for later, along with the dawning realization that silence is not just courtesy here. It is insulation. Your bed space feels warmer simply because it is yours now. Cloak folded, pouch under pillow, dagger persuaded to be symbolic rather than operational. You and your bedfellow settle into the efficient geometry you negotiated. Head to foot, elbows loyal to their owners, knees generous to their neighbors. Your shared breath makes a weather system. The blanket rises and falls like a tide resigned to kindness. You listen. The hearth talks in vowels. The dog sighs in consonants. The roof adds the soft percussion of rain ticking out a lullaby you promise to keep in tempo. Before your eyes close, you notice one more economy. Quiet is warmer than conversation. Stillness keeps the curtain steady, keeps heat from spilling, keeps the dog from reconsidering his professional boundaries. You surrender to it the way someone steps into a bath they can finally afford. Somewhere behind your lids the fire hums, and the inn, having spent its wood like a careful lord, lets the night's true currency, bodies, pay back the heat in soft, even installments until dawn. If you dream of numbers, they will be embers counting themselves to sleep. The bed you finally claim turns out to be less a place to sleep and more a museum of investments. Start with the frame. Heavy timbers shouldering years of stories, mortise and tenon joints that creak like polite applause. Each board cost someone cartage, carpentry, and the kind of iron nails that don't grow on hedges. Above that, ropes lace a web under the mattress, the old technology of comfort. They sag with honesty, which is why a sensible host keeps a bed key hanging by the hearth to turn and tighten them. You give the cords a cautious tug and they answer like a lute that needs tuning, promising music if you're kind. The mattress, call it a tick, a long sack of stout cloth, might hold fresh straw, or flocked wool, or, for the fortunate, feathers that remember the sky. Linen to make the casing, thread to stitch it, hours to stuff it, and more hours to beat it back into obedience when it cakes into little continents. No wonder the innkeeper treats each tick like a rental property. Fill it every night and it pays. Leave it idle and it eats the future in dust and moth. She pats yours the way a farmer pats a productive cow, and you try not to moo. A mainstream historical fact pads in wearing the academic slippers of probate. In medieval and early modern wills, beds and bedding rank among the most valuable household goods, bequeathed as the best bed, the feather bed with bolster and pair of sheets. A later playwright famously left his wife his second best bed. Romantic or not, it proves the point. Beds are capital. Inns, being practical temples of capital, make that capital earn by placing 2 bodies per mattress, so the asset pays for its linens, its ropes, and its daily share of firewood. Your nightly fee is not just rent, it is interest on timber, flax, and geese. Your hand slides over the sheet. If there is linen tonight, it was purchased in fields and rivers. Flax pulled and retted, spun and woven, bleached on the grass, then cut and hemmed by eyes that squinted through winter. If there is not, you meet the tick itself, sturdy sacking that smells faintly of hops. Not because it brewed ale, but because someone tucked a sachet there to sweeten the truth. The dog, who has appointed himself quality control, gives it one investigative sigh and returns to his duties, circularity and warmth. Either way, you are lying on labor made visible. Look up and there's a canopy, maybe a simple tester board with curtains, maybe only a rod brave enough to dream. Fabric pools like dusk. It keeps drafts from pickpocketing your heat and turns a bed into a privatized climate. In fancier chambers it would be carved and painted, a proclamation that sleep here is an event. In this common room it's plainer, a modest proposition. Draw me, dim the world. Pretend it is yours alone. You and your bedfellow rehearse the choreography. Slide the fabric just far enough to hush the room and trap the warmth you've already paid for at the hearth. Quirky tidbit time. Some hosts nickname their better beds, not with grand titles, but with practical labels. The red curtain, the long tick, the good feathers, so regulars know what they're bargaining for. You find this adorable and also extremely helpful. If someone offers you the springy rope, you know to ask whether the bed key will be making a cameo. The apprentice swears the key has its own personality. You believe him. The key looks like it has opinions. The truckle bed underneath, the little drawer of sleep, waits for an apprentice or a latecomer who folds like hope. You tap it with your toe, and it rings like a low bell. In wealthier houses, a trundle lets a servant sleep near enough to wake at a whispered name. In an inn, it turns floor into revenue when the rain writes its RSVP on the door. The innkeeper has learned from the hearth. Everything that can warm should also earn. Even the bench along the wall wears a cushion tonight, as if auditioning for the role of accidental bed. You can smell the arithmetic. Soap is coin. Starch is coin. A second pair of sheets is a crown and a half of bragging. Laundry day is a duel between water, wood, and will. When fares flood the road with bodies, laundry loses the skirmish, which is why lavender sachets punch above their weight class. You are not offended. You are a traveler with realistic goals and a gentle fondness for optimism that smells like a herb garden. Besides, after Section 2 taught you the price of a rectangle of sleep, you're grateful merely to have one with corners. Another practical fact arrives with a carpenter's shrug. Rope beds need tightening. That may be the origin of sleep tight. Historians still argue whether the phrase came from ropes drawn taut, or simply meant sleep securely in older dialects. The etymology wobbles like a bed before the key has its turn. Either way, the image is at your knees. Chords that want a quarter turn. Knots that remember a better evening. And you, grateful for any metaphor that makes the creaking sound intentional. If it creaks in rhythm, call it music and go to sleep faster. You trace a finger along the seam of the tick and imagine its life cycle. Straw ticks are emptied, refilled, and beaten on bright mornings. Wool flock is carded and coaxed into loft. Feather beds are pampered like cats and sometimes stitched through to keep their migratory birds from all flying to one corner. When a tick finally fails, it doesn't die. It becomes padding for benches, stuffing for cushions, or a persuasive draft stopper for the door. Nothing leaves the economy. It just changes jobs. Even the broken rope will be reborn as a tie for bundles of rushes on the floor. Weight whispers status here. Feather is float. Flock is compromise. Straw is honesty. You have slept on all three in other lives you swear you remember, and you know which one makes your dreams lighter. Still, under this blanket, with a stranger whose elbows have excellent manners, and a dog who moonlights as a foot warmer, Straw feels like gratitude in a sack. You shift, you settle, and admit that comfort often means consenting to clever math. 2 to a tick turns expense back into asset. The bed pays for itself while the room cools, and the curfew bell outside becomes only a memory. The frame clicks once as if it knows a century-old joke and declines to share it. If tomorrow you had more silver, you might buy a private chamber, a feather tick that pretends to be a cloud, a warming pan without scorch marks, and the luxury of sleeping parallel to your ambitions. Tonight you buy enough. A share in a bed that has worked for its living as long as anyone can remember. You draw the curtain, place your pack under your head, and listen for the dog's consonant sigh. The house's capital pays out in the only currency that matters now, the steady interest of warmth compounded by breath. Night has a different grammar here, and every sentence ends with a question mark until somebody answers it from the doorway with, "Who goes there?" You and your bedfellow arrange yourselves like 2 sentries who happen to be horizontal, practicing the kind of vigilance that can be performed with eyes half closed. Packs slide under pillows, purses tuck into the warm geography between shoulder and tick. Dagger becomes bookmark, visible enough to discourage borrowing, peaceful enough to let sleep happen. The dog, promoted without paperwork, stations himself at your feet, one ear cocked like a hinged lid. If earlier the fire taught you how to be warm and the bed taught you what comfort costs, tonight you study security, the quiet arithmetic of elbows, straps, and trust. The room edits itself for safety. Boots line up like witnesses. Cloaks climb pegs out of temptation's reach. The last candle hides under a cup so its gossip can't meet the straw. You agree to the midnight watch in a whisper, the oldest contract on the road. If you stir, you look. If you look, you count heads. If you count heads and the sum is wrong, you make noise in the key of alarm. The grand instrument for this is not a trumpet, but a tankard against a trestle. Loud, fast, persuasive. The innkeeper demonstrated earlier with a single sharp knock that had everyone's eyebrows at attention. Consider it the house fire drill, and also the "please stop that" bell. A mainstream historical fact walks in carrying a lantern and a statute book. From the late 13th century, the Statute of Winchester, 1285, in England formalized watch and ward, requiring towns to keep night watchmen and to raise the hue and cry after offenders. Neighbors were legally obliged to help chase thieves. Other cities on the continent had their own ordinances, but the idea rhymed. After curfew, the street belongs to patrols, and strangers in motion need a very good reason or a very generous friend. That is why inns glow like permitted islands and why numbers, 2 to a bed, 10 to a room, feel like protection as much as economy. Alone, you are a target. Together you're a chorus with more elbows than anyone wants to argue with. You test the choreography. Your partner pretends to sleep and rattles the blanket. You murmur, the dog snuffs, an apprentice materializes from nowhere to ask if everything is quite. It is, and you give him a broken biscuit for his supernatural speed. He pockets it as if it were a medal. Over by the hearth, 2 carters have nested back to back in a defensive geometry learned in barns. If one shifts, the other wakes. If both shift, the bench complains loud enough to wake the roof. Furniture is part of the alarm system here. So, honestly, are your knees. They click like respectable castanets. The doors tell their own story. A bar slides into iron brackets with the contented thunk of a good idea. And the latch string, trussed on a rope in daylight, hides itself for the dark. Windows are smaller than you'd prefer, but exactly as large as prudence allows. A shutter is worth a regret avoided. The innkeeper walks the perimeter, touching wood the way a captain touches the rail, counting, blessing, memorizing. When she returns to the hearth, she slips the bed key into its hook with a small metallic sound that says, without saying, "This house is closed to interruption." Quirky tidbit. Some travelers swear by shoe knots as alarms. They lace their shoes together and loop them over the bedrope. If an optimistic thief tries to collect footwear in the dark, the whole contraption thumps the bed frame and bites a shin on its way down, creating both sound effects and instant repentance. The apprentice adds that a chamber pot, inverted over a purse and balanced with a spoon, is the deluxe model. You imagine the clatter and agree it's more persuasive than a sermon. The dog, hearing the word pot, declines comment with professional dignity. You find yourself learning people as if they were locks you might need to open. The miller's deep breathing pattern is 6 counts in, a canyon out. The pilgrim's whisper prayers land like moths. The girl in the corner coughs 3 times and then not again. This is not nosiness. It is inventory. If a new sound cuts across the room, board creak, latch whisper, fabric's soft hush, your mind, set like a spring, will compare it to the list and kick you gently awake. 2 to a bed makes that easier. 2 brains to notice. 2 sets of ears to triangulate the little geography of a night. Historians still argue whether highway banditry and nocturnal theft were as common as the chronicles suggest, or whether monks and city clerks simply loved a moral tale with villains in the dark. What everyone agrees on is that fear of such things structured behavior. Curfews rang, watches walked, doors barred, and inns filled up with people who preferred a stranger's snore to an empty road that hummed with possibilities. Your own calculus is blunt. You can't out-argue the dark, but you can outnumber it. Patrols pass outside like commas in the long sentence of the night. A staff knocks the cobbles in a pattern older than the roof. A voice calls the hour and the weather. Past midnight, and raining, which you already knew but welcome anyway as proof that someone else knows it with you. The dog acknowledges the patrol with one discreet woof that says, "Carried," and returns to guarding your toes. You drift towards sleep, and then remember your part in the treaty. You slide a hand out, touch the purse knot, inventory the room by sound, touch the warm brick at the bed's foot like a small lighthouse, and let go again. Another fact, this one belonging to guilds and hosts. Towns licensed hostelers, and sometimes required them to keep a lamp burning, to lock up at a set hour, and to be ready to present their guests if the watch asked questions in the morning. Hospitality is regulation braided with custom. Safety is part of what you pay for, even if it's listed nowhere on the slate. That's why the innkeeper sleeps light, why the apprentice knows where the cudgel lives, and why the dog is excellent at looking as if he might wake the saints if necessary. Your bedfellow turns once, permission granted by elbows with manners, and the curtain stirs like a quiet tide. You both freeze for the same heartbeat, listening, and then the room's familiar orchestra resumes. Stew settling in bowls, rain writing long vowels, someone's soft chuckle drifting from a dream. You think back to the lessons of the night, rope beds tuned with their key, sachets of hops flattering the straw, the curfew bell that pushed the world indoors, and you feel the logic click into place. 2 to a bed is thermodynamics, yes. It is accounting, yes. And it is also policy. Mutual protection you can nap inside. Before your watch ends, a small drama unspools near the door. The latch lifts a whisper, the bar complains, and the innkeeper is already there with a lantern that contains both light and questions. A drenched latecomer, embarrassed into courtesy, offers explanation, coin, and an apology that steams. He gets the pallet by the chimney, the lecture about candles, and a mug that tastes like forgiveness. The bar settles back. The dog, satisfied with the paperwork, rotates precisely 1/4 turn. Your eyes close, and you smile at the dark. The house is awake enough for you not to be. By now you've learned that the blanket isn't the only thing you share. You also share a rule book that nobody wrote down, because everyone already knows it by the same muscle memory that remembers where the bed key hangs. Etiquette is the architecture that keeps a 2-person mattress from becoming a 2-act tragedy. The curtain, for instance, humble fabric on a rod, isn't just decoration, it's the border treaty. Draw it to the approved width, 1 handspan beyond modesty, 1 short of selfishness, and the room melts away like a conversation you don't need to join. Tug it too far, and you'll earn the universal rebuke of a sleeping house. A synchronized sigh. You can hear it now, like waves telling shorelines to behave. Lights out is an institution. The last tallow candle goes under the cup, a clink that means the inn is on quiet hours. And any remaining brightness must be borrowed from the hearth's red patience. You learn how to move in that glow, slow, deliberate, respectful, so your shadow doesn't do slapstick on the curtain. Whispered rules guide everything. Cough into cloak, turn like a page, not like a saw. Climb out in slow motion with the blanket in neutral, then return with the same careful diplomacy. You become a dancer whose stage directions are, don't yank, don't jostle, don't invent weather. A mainstream historical fact unfolds right there in the weave. Bed curtains were common in better-off households by the later Middle Ages, not only for privacy, but for warmth. Drafts can pick pockets, and curtains keep your heat taxable in the smallest possible jurisdiction. Inventories list them proudly. A pair of red say curtains with valance, because fabric is money you can sleep inside. Inns adopt a plainer version for common rooms, more practical than pretty, but the principle survives. Cloth turns a bed into a microclimate and a minor kingdom where courtesy is law. Courtesy starts with introductions. You and your bedfellow exchange names in the dialect of drowsy, the sort of names that may be true or may be adequate for tonight's purposes. First decisions are directional, head to foot or parallel. If head to foot, you promise to respect the sovereignty of ankles. If parallel, you pledge neutrality of elbows. Snoring is addressed by treaty language. If one sings in a minor key, the other will meet them in harmony with a gentle nudge at the chorus. Historians still argue whether the head-to-foot arrangement was truly standard in crowded inns or just a polite ideal copied from household manuals. What you have is the field test and the dog's ruling, which says, whatever keeps the blanket evenly distributed. The curtain teaches you to edit sound. Inside it's dim, you whisper fewer words and more intentions. A tap on fabric to warn a turn. 2 light taps to request blanket. A 3rd tap only in emergencies, or when someone has annexed territory clearly marked, no man's knees land. You discover that bed curtains amplify tiny signals the way a drum does. A fingertip can carry a paragraph, which is an excellent reason to keep your fingertips friendly. Across the room, another pair negotiates a cough break with the grace of court dancing. Small theater, big stakes. Sleep is the prize. Quirky tidbit. Some travelers sew a night note, a little embroidered strip on the inside hem of their cloak, with symbols that remind them of etiquette cues. A tiny ear for quiet, a stylized knot for purse tie, a miniature curtain for remember to close. Is it universal? Hardly. Is it adorable? Absolutely. You consider commissioning one that also includes a dog icon for foot warmer present and a bed key squiggle for rope likely. Practical? Maybe not. Charming? 10 out of 10 would embroider again. The inn's choreography extends beyond the mattress. There's a right way to approach a shared bed. Announce yourself at curtain's edge. Offer a cough of recognition, not a surprise. Lift the curtain at the seam so the draft doesn't slap your partner, and slide in along the grain of the linen. There's a right way to remedy a blanket shortfall. No single dramatic tug. We are not starting a sea battle. But progressive negotiation, 5 threads at a time, until justice returns. You become a blanket diplomat, occasionally appealing to the supreme paw, the dog, who adjudicates by lying on the disputed border until both parties forget what they were mad about. A practical fact with a tailor's thimble. Linens get changed less often than modern noses prefer. Washing means water, fuel, daylight, and labor. To soften that truth, inns deploy scented sachets, hops and lavender, and strewing herbs on the rushes near the bed. They also enforce clean night shift customs. Keep your outer grime at the door, sleep cap on, boots off, belt open. The curtain, therefore, isn't merely hiding you. It's negotiating between cleanliness and possibility. The possibility is that someone's cloak did too much weather today. Historians still argue whether mixed company bed sharing was rare, forbidden, or simply managed by a lattice of situational rules, chaperones, shutters, and sheer common sense. What you see tonight is the managerial layer. Innkeepers place travelers by caste, kin, and plausible stories. Apprentices act as referees. The curtain does the heavy lifting of modesty. And everybody understands that proximity is not permission. The house has a spine made of boundaries. You can feel it whenever a hand strays toward rudeness, and the curtain whispers, very audibly, "Don't." Lights out also means joke out, but not entirely. The room still supports light humor, the kind you can hear with your shoulders. Your bedfellow murmurs that his snore is a small organ voluntary in F minor, and you reply that yours is a distant mill, well regulated. The dog, deeply professional, declines to laugh but allows his tail to issue a gentle thud of approval. It's funny how much comedy fits inside a whisper when everyone wants to be on the same page of the lullaby. The curtain's greatest gift is directional time. Inside, minutes are longer and rounder. Outside, patrol staffs knock the hour in tidy fractions. You count your breath with the roof's rain and the hearth's vowels, and measure your movements to protect the microclimate you've negotiated. When you must rise, you perform the slow escape. One hand to the warm brick, one knee to the tolerated zone, one foot to the floor, and a final tilt that keeps the curtain from billowing into international incident. You become a heist artist, stealing yourself from sleep and promising to return the goods. Before you drift, you think back. Curfew bells funneling bodies indoors, rope beds tuned with the key, the fire's thin economy, the watch outside, the pouch under your pillow. All those systems keep the night from unraveling. The curtain, modest and unremarked, keeps you from unraveling each other. Two to a bed could be chaos. Etiquette turns it into choreography. You give the fabric one approving pinch, the universal sign for truce holds, and surrender to the small private weather you've made. You notice how the room arranges itself like a tapestry where certain threads never touch. Men peel to one side of the fire, women to the other. Apprentices and servants form a small island near the door, as if ready to tide in and out with errands. It isn't a strict wall, more a current you can feel in the way people place their cloaks and choose their cups. The innkeeper reads those currents with the calm of a harbor pilot. She seats a merchant's wife and her maid near the stair where the curtain is thick, tucks two friars by the hearth's quiet corner, and steers a trio of carters toward the long bed along the wall. You can almost hear the placement rules clicking like the bed frame. Kin together, masters with servants within whispering distance, strangers matched by plausibility and temperament, and anyone with wandering hands reallocated to a colder breeze. Propriety here is a patchwork constructed from time, coins, and context. Married couples may win a curtained bed to themselves if the purse cooperates. Lone women, widows, or girls on the road with a chaperone get a kind of mobile fortress. A cot near staff, a lamp within easy reach, and the dog staking out an extra border with his tail. Your own curtain becomes a small embassy. You learn the diplomatic language quickly. Announce your movements, keep your boots loyal to their peg, and never, ever let the blanket conduct foreign policy without consent. A mainstream historical fact takes a seat at the trestle and smooths its sleeves. Medieval civic and ecclesiastical regulations often policed bad lodgings and improper mixing. Not just brothels but also alehouses and unlicensed hostels where men and women slept in scandalously unpartitioned proximity. Sermons scolded, town ordinances fined, and guilds of hostelers were urged to keep order, lamp, and ledger in good repair. Privacy was rare. Supervision, therefore, did a lot of the moral heavy lifting. The innkeeper's gaze is part of that framework. A moving wall that keeps the house's honor stitched together one seating chart at a time. Mixed company is where the rules get interesting. If a family arrives, the child sleeps between parents like a warm punctuation mark. If a mother travels with a maid, the maid becomes a hinge, fetching, guarding, and, when needed, snoring loudly enough to discourage poetry. If a lone woman appears at curfew with rain in her hair and coin in her palm, the innkeeper turns into a fortress made of fabric and policy, inventing a safe alcove by sheer arrangement, a pallet in view of the counter, a curtain that closes everything except the innkeeper's attention, and the apprentice posted like a punctuation mark no one dares misread. You watch that little transformation with quiet relief. This house has a spine. Quirky tidbit. Some inns keep a chaperone bell. A tiny handbell on the counter meant less to summon staff than to signal that a woman or a mixed group wants an escort to the yard, the latrine, or the stable door after lights out. Ring once for apprentice, twice for innkeeper, thrice for bring the lantern and the firm voice. You hear a single chime now and see the apprentice glide into duty with the solemn pride of a knight who has recently learned which end of the lance points forward. The dog accompanies, because that is his brand. The house rules are part posted, part performed. No candle past the cup. No boots in bed. No ale to the loft. Couples keep their curtains shut. Strangers keep it at courtesy width. Apprentices circulate like punctuation to trim sentences that try to run on. You watch a soft correction in real time. A drunk chuckle grows teeth near the women's corner. The innkeeper appears with a fresh log for the fire, and a story about her formidable aunt who once ejected a bishop for snoring toward the wrong curtain. Everyone laughs. The current resets. Authority, expressed as anecdote and a very competent eyebrow. You adjust your own manners to match. When you step out from behind your curtain, You do it like a tide. Steady, predictable, not splashing into anyone else's weather. You linger at the hearth just long enough to warm the soles of your feet and the corners of your smile. Then you drift back, letting the inn's quiet do its work. In the far corner, two pilgrims exchange badge stories like children trading marbles. Between them is a thread of propriety as strong as any rope. They speak of shrines, not shadows, and leave their curtains a handspan shy of rumor. Historians still argue whether strict segregation in common sleeping spaces was a preached ideal or a consistently practiced reality. Surviving bylaws wag a finger. Literary sources love a mishap. Account books reveal paid private chambers for those who could afford to bypass the problem altogether. On the floorboards, however, you see the practical compromise. Proximity managed by vigilance, curtains doing most of the theology, and the innkeeper running a moral geometry lesson with furniture and lamplight. The dog contributes to the curriculum by choosing his alliances carefully. He spends part of the night at your feet, brand consistency, then relocates to the pallet near the merchant's wife when the wind sneaks under the door. The signal is unmistakable. This border is guarded. You give him a soundless salute. He accepts in the key of nap. You recognize the small language of shared space. A cough to warn of passage. A quiet, by your leave, to cross the common floor. A murmured, mind the step, at the stair. The inn's choreography keeps intimacy from tripping over itself. You smile at the thought that civilization is sometimes nothing more than everyone agreeing to whisper about their elbows. A practical note sewn into the hem of the night. Some towns require hostelers to record guests, not just names, which can be arranged, but origins, trades, and reasons for travel. Those records protect the house when questions knock at dawn and help the watch decide whether a stranger's presence belongs to commerce or trouble. You saw the ledger earlier, more a memory palace than a book, but the innkeeper carries it in her head with astonishing clarity. She knows who should be on which pallet, whose curtain should be shut, and which pair of boots should be together in the morning. Memory as security, order as courtesy. Inside your small kingdom, you and your bedfellow keep the treaty simple. No storytelling after the candle, no elbows behaving like punctuation, no sudden allegiances with the blanket. He tells you, before the cup goes over the wick, that he once shared a bed with 3 journeymen and a small goat during Fair Week. You ask the only appropriate question: which one snored? He breathes the word goat, like confession, and the dog pretends not to hear professional gossip. Whether the world outside this door is full of scandal, or merely full of weather, you don't know. What you do know is that this room has decided what kind of place it will be. A practical bargain between warmth and conscience. The bed key hangs by the hearth, promising a tighter weave in the ropes tomorrow. The curfew bell is only a memory now, replaced by the softer bell of breath and blanket. The rules hum themselves to sleep. You pull your curtain that last handspan, exactly as agreed. Feel the dog's tail give one approving tap against your ankle, and let propriety and linen hold the night still enough to dream in. The moment you settle, the straw speaks. A small choir of crackles offering commentary on your choices. It is not rude exactly. It just has a lot to say about rain, boots, and the day's gossip it overheard from your cloak. The tick breathes out a meadow's worth of memories. If you listen closely, you could swear it mentions geese in a wistful tone, which is rich coming from something that is not, alas, feather. You shift, and a little galaxy of dust dances in the candle's afterglow, then drifts down like tired stars. The dog sniffs, sneezes, and with the air of a seasoned critic, approves your selection of tonight's fragrance. Late harvest with hints of traveler. The room's smell is a tapestry with every thread trying very hard. Bass notes, damp wool, old smoke, tallow that has opinions, and the brave honesty of bodies that walked a day too long. Treble notes, onion stew, ale, wet dog, present company magnificently included, and stable ghosts seeping through the wall like shy cousins. But there's also the counter-melody that keeps the whole song from skidding. Herbs. Someone has slipped a sachet of lavender into your tick. The rushes near your bed wear a confetti of dried thyme and sweet woodruff. A sprig of rosemary dangles from the bedpost like a pennant that says, "It's fine. We tried." The effect is not luxury so much as intention, and intention is a comfort you can smell. A mainstream historical fact rustles in with the straw. Strewing herbs, rosemary, lavender, mint, rue, meadowsweet, were commonly scattered on floors and tucked into bedding in medieval and early modern Europe, believed to freshen air, deter pests, and correct foul odors in an era before sewer grates and citrus clean everything. Manuals, recipe books, and household accounts all nod toward the practice. Even churches favored meadowsweet on feast days because it held up kindly underfoot and under noses. Inns, being practical households with extra snoring, borrowed the habit. A little garden on the floor so the night smells like deliberate choices rather than accidents. Your own sachet does its best to sweet-talk the straw. It helps. Lavender offers bedtime diplomacy. Hops, when present, bring their famous drowsy charm. Your bedfellow produces a hops pillow, a little linen case stuffed with the papery cones, and protests that it persuades the mind to think about clouds. The dog protests that it persuades him to think about snacks. You hide the pillow in the curtain's lee, where its scent can whisper stories of harvest instead of brewery. You like the sleight of hand. This isn't a feather bed, but it can smell like one that had a lovely walk. Of course, there are other residents, vermin, who find all beds welcoming unless specifically told otherwise. Fleas and lice love crowds and warmth the way poets love metaphors. Bedbugs practice the ancient art of arriving uninvited and making themselves memorable. The inn fights back with laundering when fuel and daylight agree, beating ticks in the yard when the weather smiles, airing blankets on rare crisp mornings, and bribing luck with herbs that pests allegedly dislike. Tansy, wormwood, southernwood, pennyroyal. The apprentice swears wormwood works. You suspect wormwood just smells confident. Either way, the sachets do two jobs. They probably deter something small, and they definitely convince you that efforts were made, which is sleep's favorite recipe. Quirky tidbit for the nightstand. A few travelers keep sleep coins, small discs of perfumed wax wrapped in cloth to slip beneath the pillow, pressed with tiny symbols, a sprig, a star, a cross. The wax slowly warms and releases fragrance. In theory, it improves dreams and discourages night critters. Your bedfellow shows you one stamped with a hop cone and a crescent moon. You inhale and get faint brewhouse plus grandmother's cupboard. It's oddly charming, like tucking a lullaby into your pillowcase at a price you can almost afford. You consider investing in one marked dog, purely for brand alignment. Meanwhile, the curtain plays air traffic control. Drawn to an agreed width, it traps your particular weather. 2 sleepers, 1 sachet, a hopeful brick cooling at your feet. while keeping the communal miasma politely on its side of the fabric. You remember the heated brick tucked to the foot of beds, and decide that, of all the heat technologies on offer, bodies plus curtains are the only ones that don't threaten to scorch either linen or reputation. You're a tidy little biome now. Breath, herb, warmth, contained enough to make the outside world's perfumes seem like rumor. A fact with sharper teeth pads across your thoughts. Plague. Fleas on rats, fleas on people. Disease threading itself through inns and markets like a thief with 1,000 keys. And here comes the scholar's candle. Historians still argue whether certain outbreaks spread primarily via rat fleas, the classic textbook villain, or whether human ectoparasites, body lice and human fleas, played a larger role, especially in cold snaps when rats die off and humans cluster indoors. The footnote is not a lullaby, but it is a reminder that cleanliness, crowding, and fabric all have stakes beyond comfort. You tuck that knowledge under your pillow with the purse, not to sleep on it, but to keep it where your caution lives. The innkeeper fights the invisible with visible rituals. Rushes get raked and replaced. The worst are burned, the best aired and rotated. She keeps a keg of strong lye for linen's bad days and a basket of strewing mix by the hearth. Equal parts rosemary, lavender, and bravado. When fairs crowd the road and laundry loses the war, she doubles the herbs and shortens the lectures. You watch her sprinkle the floor with the solemnity of a priest with holy water, and you find yourself oddly reassured. Belief, done earnestly, is its own clean smell. Your bedfellow, devoted to citizen science, demonstrates the blanket tumble, a brisk shake outside, downwind, to confuse the enemy. The dog supervises from the threshold and applauds by wag. You consider your own contribution. You've already done the purse knot trick, so you add the pillow flip, a maneuver renowned for redistributing dreams, and, not incidentally, cooling the warm side. For a moment the small weather in your curtain lifts and settles like a cloud deciding on a hill. When it lands, the lavender has the upper hand. Another odd belief surfaces like a bubble in stew. Some folks argue that sleeping with a sprig of rue tucked in your cap keeps nightmares at bay. Others swear by placing iron, a knife or a key, under the pillow, to pin the night hag to the mattress. Your bedfellow confesses to the iron habit. You confess to trusting dogs and curtains more than metallurgy. He taps the knife hilt anyway, because tradition is a creature that naps beside anxiety and wakes up whenever someone tells a story. You breathe. The room answers with a softer chord than when you arrived. Stew has retreated into memory. The hearth is a red whisper. The sachet is holding its line like a polite sentinel. You realize you can name the smells in layers now, as if they've turned into a map. Smoke at the border, wool in the hills, lavender in the meadow. You and your bedfellow somewhere near the river where warmth moves. This, you decide, is civilization. Not the absence of odor, but the addition of intention, until the air tells a story that lets you sleep. And just before your eyes close, the dog delivers his professional verdict. One sigh, one thump of tail, and curls so his paws rest on the hem of your blanket. The gesture says, in the oldest language of night, that the borders hold. Herb defeats hint, warmth outvotes weather, and the little citizens of the straw, feeling the political tides turn against them, choose exile to the edges where dreams don't reach. You smile into the linen, grateful that someone, many someones, fought tonight's battle with sprigs and custom so your curtain could smell like a decision rather than a compromise. Law arrives at the inn the way dawn does, Quietly, everywhere at once, and with a list. You feel it before you see it. The tapster measures ale to a wooden notch inside the jack. The apprentice turns the bed key with the solemnity of inventory rather than romance. The door bar lifts at a knock that sounds like it was trained for the task. This house isn't just a roof. It's a licensed creature. Part tavern, part hostel, part civic promise that travelers won't spend the night bargaining with puddles. You pay for warmth and stew, yes, but you also pay for the paperwork you never have to read. Near the counter hangs a scorched board of numbers, measures for ale and wine, the local standard etched like commandments. The innkeeper pulls a jack that stops exactly where the notch tells it to. No more, no less. A mainstream historical fact takes the stool beside you. Towns and manors across medieval Europe kept assizes and bylaws on bread and ale, with officials charged to check standard measures and to fine short pours. In many places an ale taster, or ale conner, tasted, measured, and kept the peace of the cup. The system isn't glamorous, but it's how your mug becomes predictable and how your coin stops feeling lonely when it leaves your hand. Predictability is sleep's cousin. Over the hearth, a scrap of parchment flutters. A license renewed at fair time. The seal, a proud blob of wax shaped like a cherry that learned posture. The innkeeper has sworn to keep the peace of the house, to lodge the road's honest traffic, and to show her guests on request when the watch wants answers at cockcrow. She jokes that the wax is mostly to keep spiders literate, but you can hear the respect in her routine. Lights under cups after hours, doors barred to the proper click, a lantern kept ready for patrols. Custom is the front door. Compliance is the lock. Step outside and the town's machinery explains itself in footnotes. Tollmen by the gate. A watch that calls the hours. A clerk who can produce a bylaw about anything if you say, "what if," too loudly. Fairs bring a different rulebook, a temporary town inside the town, so quotas and expectations shift like weather. When crowds surge, the hostelry guild nudges its members to make room, and suddenly beds multiply like rabbits with good references. 2 to a mattress becomes 3 on a pallet becomes, you wouldn't believe how comfortable this bench is once you learn its name. You nod. You've slept on worse compliments. Quirky Tidbit strolls in wearing leather breeches and a self-satisfied grin. Some English towns claim their ale conner tested the strength and cleanliness of ale by sitting in a shallow puddle of it spread on a bench. If his breeches stuck, the brew was sugary, or the bench regrettable. Universal? Hardly. Folklore pinned to a real office? Likely. You choose to believe just enough to enjoy the image, while your jack, properly filled to its legal smile, chooses to be delicious. The dog eyes the bench and refuses to participate in science. The ledger appears again, this time with neat little lists. Names approximated, trades declared, origins guessed with the accuracy of a weather vane. Some hostelers were required to record guests, to vouch them to the watch at sunrise. The innkeeper treats this like washing dishes, unromantic but essential. You realize this is why the house feels calm when patrol staffs knock the cobbles. Both sides have a handshake already. You sleep better inside handshakes. Price controls blow through with monarchs and mayors. During lean winters, authority begs or orders modest prices. During fair weeks, reality tells prices to mind their own business. The innkeeper navigates with a face that knows the weight of a fine and the cost of a frown. She can recite with psalm-like rhythm which officer cares about ale strength, which one about bed counts, and which one about lamps burning late. You respect her as a translator between how it ought to be and how people are. Historians still argue whether an inn like this carried a firm legal duty to receive all comers, the ancestor of the later common law doctrine about innkeepers, or whether medieval practice was a looser braid of custom, guild pressure, and a host's right to refuse trouble. Tonight's evidence? The house takes in a drenched stranger after hours and gives him a pallet, but it also ejects, gently and with story, anyone whose elbows won't sign the etiquette treaty. Obligation exists, but it wears common sense like armor. Guilds hum behind everything. In market towns, hostelers and victuallers joined associations that promised cleanliness, fair measures, and readiness when courts rode in, or fairs burst the seams of the streets. The apprentice, who has overheard more minutes than he would wish on an enemy, summarizes the creed with a solemn wag of the dog's tail as punctuation. Keep the ale honest, keep the sheets frequent, keep the peace visible. Frequent is a word that does a lot of work. The law presses outward, too. Gates charge tolls for carts, bridges collect for passages. Ferrymen memorize who owes and who paid with stories instead of coin. Each little rule shaves a corner off chaos so a road can stay open. Earlier, when the tollman waved you through for promising to help push a stalled wagon, you entered a network of favors as binding as wax. The innkeeper recognizes that mark on you and sets an extra trencher of stew down like punctuation at the end of a sentence she approves. Audits happen. A sergeant at the door checks that candles are out and embers banked. An ale taster takes an officious sip. A clerk asks delicately how many heads the loft holds tonight. The house cooperates with the speed of someone who has no interest in waking the saints. The dog accompanies the audit with a single thump of tail that says, "We are accredited in wagging." You sign nothing. Your snores will be your signature. Think back through the night's quiet lessons, the bell that pushed people indoors, the watch that made solitude suspicious, the fire that budgeted warmth, the bed that behaved like capital, the curtain that legislated kindness. All of it funnels you toward a simple logic. When a town expects travelers to be housed, when fuel is dear, when measures are fixed, when patrols want people behind doors, an inn becomes a civic machine that converts bodies into safety with blankets as gears. The setting that keeps the machine from stalling is easy to read on the bed frame. 2 to a place, fairly measured ale in the cup, and a latch that answers to both courtesy and code. Before sleep takes you, the innkeeper taps the license with a fingernail, the small sound of compliance, and smiles without looking at anyone in particular. "We take all kinds," she says softly, "and you understand the footnote. Honest coin, honest intent." The parchment flutters as if nodding. You lower your head to the linen, feel the ropes hold with their tidy grammar, and let the town's invisible architecture, bylaw, wax, watch, guild, do what it was designed to do. Keep the night ordinary enough for you to dream. Badges glitter in the dim like small moons that learned manners. On hats, on cloaks, on the edge of a pack. Little pewter miracles declaring big journeys. A scallop shell for St. James, an ampulla for St. Thomas, crossed keys for Peter, a palm for Rome. You can read the room by its tin constellations. 2 Frenchmen brag in metal about Compostela. A woman with a staff carries an ampulla from Canterbury that taps her cup like a polite bell. A local shows off a leaden vernacle, more enthusiasm than geography. The innkeeper, who has seen all seas without leaving the road, nods from behind her counter and pours as if hydrating a map. Mobility explains the mattress arithmetic as neatly as coin ever could. Pilgrims and merchants don't move alone. They congeal into processions and caravans that need roofs at repeatable intervals, every 10 to 15 miles, a bed-shaped promise. Sharing turns a map line into something that actually arrives. A blanket split in half becomes a timetable that doesn't slip in rain. A pallet doubled becomes a bridge over a night that would otherwise swallow steps. You and your bedfellow, acquaintances of 12 hours and a warm brick, fit into that machinery like two cogs that have agreed not to squeak. A mainstream historical fact steps over the threshold wearing dust and certainty. The great pilgrimage routes of medieval Europe, the Camino to Santiago, the road to Becket's shrine at Canterbury, the Via Francigena toward Rome, were supported by a network of monasteries, hospitals for travelers, xenodochia, confraternities, and licensed inns. Wayhouses offered broth and beds, abbeys kept guest quarters. Royal and urban authorities sometimes issued safe conducts to grease the wheels of piety and trade. A badge was more than a souvenir, it was a signal to the whole system. This one is part of the traffic the road expects. The merchant table jingles in a different key. Scales, tally sticks, and a little weight set that looks like a traveling chess game. Their badges are subtler. Guild pins, a strip of colored braid announcing a company if you speak the dialect. They speak in stages as if the road were a recipe. So many leagues to the bridge, so many to the ferry. One steady day to the next market where a particular host owes us a bed-shaped favor. It occurs to you that a caravan is only as strong as its weakest mattress. If one house refuses to cram, the whole line kinks. If every house squeezes kindly, the procession hums like a rope bed newly tightened. Quirky tidbit floats from the pilgrim corner with pocket-proud delight. Some travelers melt a shaving from a pewter badge into wine at journey's end, an edible proof of miles, while others pour a drop from their ampulla into ale and call it a portable blessing with excellent head. A third camp insists the scallop shell doubles as a serviceable spoon if the stew minds its manners. Your bedfellow, a connoisseur of optimism, claims to have eaten porridge with a badge and only swallowed the road a little. The dog, attentive to porridge regardless of cutlery, seconds the motion with his tail. Routes share beds the way rivers share banks. A Compostela veteran talks through the evening rhythm you already half know. Make the door before curfew. Negotiate for rectangles of sleep. Rotate toward the fire like civilized sunflowers. Keep a pouch under your head and a promise in your whisper. By now, the gestures feel less like instructions and more like muscle memory. Hands learn to fold blankets without starting wars. Voices learn to travel only as far as the next pillow. The dog learns everyone's ankles in the order of their arrival. It's a choreography the road teaches to inns, and the inns return to the road with interest. People trade intelligence like coins with faces. One table swaps news of a washed-out bridge, another rehearses the liturgy of potholes. Someone announces that the hospital 2 stages ahead is stern but generous. Stern about candles, generous with broth. Which is exactly how you would design a safe place if linen were expensive and soup were salvation. A drover describes a ford that remembers how shallow it is by noon, which is a poet's way of saying, wait for the sun. A clerk swears that a certain tollman takes stories in lieu of half-pennies if the story features his cousin in a flattering light. You collect these notes the way a magpie collects shine and promise to spend them carefully. Historians still argue whether most of the folks flashing pilgrim badges truly walked the long roads, or whether a thriving market in locally bought souvenirs let many carry the sign without the miles. They also debate how often women traveled without male guardians beyond local shrines versus joining mixed groups on the greater routes. The room answers with practice rather than theses. Tonight you've watched the badge wearers earn their beds with mud, and you've watched a woman with a staff claim a safe corner by speaking the language of coin, custom, and a watchful innkeeper. Theory writes footnotes. Doors ask for proof. Infrastructure you can't see still touches everything. A confraternity down the road promises 10 beds to anyone wearing a certain token. A monastery further on keeps a loft of straw refreshed on odd days. A town beyond the ridge has its own ale taster and a bridge that believes in tolls with spiritual fervor. Even your blanket has cousins along the route. Other blankets that will cover other strangers who, for one night, are your future self. You find that chain of hospitality more comforting than any castle wall. Castles defend. Inns deliver. The talk tilts towards schedules as the candles tilt towards stubs. Market day pulls merchants like iron filings. Feast day pulls pilgrims like tides. Storms assemble everyone into accidental congregations with benches for pews. A jongleur tunes his tongue by the hearth, trading a corner of floor for 2 good verses in the morning. A spice seller bargains for a space near the door on account of fragile cinnamon, which earns laughs and then sympathy because cinnamon is, in fact, a diva. The innkeeper sorts the room with a glance that knows which blankets behave and which stories earn their keep. Another plain fact smells faintly of parchment and pepper. The great fairs standardized contracts, weights, and credit instruments so goods could move even when coin was scarce. That habit of standardization leaks into sleep. Bed counts, blanket shares, hours of lights out. None of it is written here, yet everyone reads the same book. The board of notches that measures ale has a silent twin in the way people measure courtesy. A handspan of curtain, a spoon that travels only after a rinse, a voice that stops at the edge of someone else's breath. The watch passes outside and calls the hour. Inside, badges glint and then go dark as cloaks climb pegs. You turn your pillow and find the knot of your purse by touch. The small ritual that tells your hands the night is friendly. Your bedfellow settles with the care of a man who has borrowed comfort and intends to return it in the morning. The dog aligns himself with the hem of the blanket to protect the border everyone has agreed to believe in. And the bed, faithful gear in the road's engine, begins the quiet work it was built for, turning distance into rest, and rest into the possibility of getting where you said you would go. Crowds don't just arrive, they happen to you like weather. One week the road is a ribbon you could pocket. The next it's a braided rope of carts, cloaks, and opinions, and every inn within 3 parishes turns into a beehive with a bed for a queen and comb cells for everyone else. Harvest does this first. Reapers and carters move like a migrating alphabet from field to mill to market, and each stop writes bodies into beds 2 at a time because wagons don't sleep and people do. You stand at the threshold and read the season in silhouettes, scythes leaning like punctuation against the wall, barley dust on boots, a glow on faces that comes from long days and short jokes. Then come fairs, the great elastic lungs of the year. The taproom turns polyglot, coins jingle in unfamiliar tempos. Even the dog pauses to reconsider everyone's ankles as potential stakeholders. A mainstream historical fact hums behind the hubbub. From the 13th century onward, chartered fairs, think the Champagne fairs in France, or England's famous St. Bartholomew's and the long-lived Nottingham Goose Fair, drew merchants, drovers, pilgrims and gawkers by the thousands, with temporary market jurisdictions and courts set up for the duration. When those tents bloom, inns bloom too. Prices, palates, and patience all expanding and contracting on a schedule older than most roofs. 2 to a tick becomes not just good manners, but survival. Otherwise, the crowd would have to start sleeping in metaphors. You smell fair week before you count it. Spice on a peddler's sleeve, wax from fresh-made candles, the distant brag of a jongleur warming up his rhymes. And somewhere the indignant chorus of geese who have learned that economics favors portability. Your bedfellow, a man of hard-won experience and soft elbows, murmurs, "If there's a goose in the street, there will be a stranger in your blanket." It proves out by nightfall. Cloaks multiply, badges glint, and the innkeeper's seating charts go from reasonable to chess problem with a single storm cloud. Courts travel too, the solemn kind with writs and wagging fingers. Justices on assize circuits roll into town and unpack jurors, clerks and litigants like luggage with opinions. The law needs tables, chairs, and beds that remember how to count, so inns brace like bridges at flood. You watch a clerk with ink on his cuffs negotiate for a quiet corner and a reliable rope, which is a phrase you'd like embroidered on a pillow. He pays for privacy. The rest of us pay attention and slide closer on our pallets because the court has a way of making elbow room confess its sins. Storms write their own charter. A bridge drowns. A ford forgets where the stones are. A ferry decides to become a philosophy lecture. Perhaps tomorrow. Tonight, the inn turns into a sudden arc and pairs species 2 by 2, pilgrim and drover, carter and clerk, because the rain has more arguments than the roof has rebuttals. You peel off your cloak and add it to the democratic queue by the hearth. People advance in the rotation by artful claims. I am carrying cheese. My boots can't remember dry. I snore only in the key of gratitude. The innkeeper's eyebrow adjudicates with Solomonic grace. You, offering to take the midnight watch, earn a warm spot on a pallet long enough to test your knee's concept of folding. Quirky tidbit flaps in with feathers and pride. On the eve of certain autumn fairs, some towns drove flocks straight through the streets so thoroughly that travelers swore the geese paid toll in feathers, leaving enough down in the rushes to improve the beds of the prudent. Whether the dog believes this is beside the point. He's currently auditing a fallen plume for compliance with wagging standards. Later, the apprentice will smuggle a handful of down into a tick and call it the luxury upgrade. You decide not to ask which tick. Plausible deniability is a bedtime story all its own. When crowds peak, etiquette shifts from polite treaty to martial law. Still gentle, still sleepy, but firm as rope drawn tight. Curtain widths narrow to the courtesy handspan. Blanket diplomacy becomes a professional sport. Ale measures stay true, because short jacks ignite revolutions faster than sermons do. The dog triples his patrols in a rolling figure 8 that touches all disputed borders and collects scratches as taxes. You and your bedfellow, veterans now, execute the parallel arrangement without conversation and fall into the choreography of whisper taps as if the room were a drum and you were both in the band. Seasons make mischief with health, and health repays in rumors. In winter, coughs multiply like opinions. Curtains keep drafts from vandalizing lungs, but close quarters still teach ailments the waltz. Historians still argue whether the earliest pulses of the so-called Little Ice Age sharpened these seasonal stressors, pushing people indoors more, lengthening heating seasons, tightening the economics that favor body heat over extra logs, or whether later centuries did the real cooling while medieval memory merely dramatized ordinary weather with sainted commentary. Your nose knows when the room has declared a snow day, regardless of the footnotes. A size week brings its own ecosystem of gossip that travels faster than carts. Jurors compare bread, plaintiffs rehearse outrage, a clerk lectures a tankard about chancery, and all of them need beds at once. The inn solves this by building a human timetable. Early sleepers on pallets near the door, late writers near the hearth where embers make ink cooperative. And anyone who snores like a trumpet volunteered for the midnight watch. By dawn, disputes have been adjudicated by blankets more often than by judges. The fair crowd turns stalls into sleep. After the last bell, a drummer trades his rhythm for a corner of floor. A spice seller buys a blanket's worth of cinnamon-scented goodwill. A tumbler claims he folds smaller than a journeyman, which, upon demonstration, is true, and therefore entitles him to the truckle. The innkeeper turns barter into architecture, stacking favors like firewood until the entire common room resembles a ledger you can nap in. Another solid fact smells faintly of parchment and pepper. Great fairs, standardized contracts, weights, and credit instruments, bills and tallies, so goods could move even when coin was scarce. That same standardization leaks into sleep. Bed counts, blanket shares, hours of lights out all run on habit and mutual expectation. The board of notches that measures ale has a silent twin in the way people measure courtesy. A handspan of curtain, a spoon that travels only after a rinse, a voice that stops at the edge of someone else's breath. You take one last inventory before the candle gives up. Curfew bells have funneled people indoors. The watch has made solitude suspicious. The fire has done its arithmetic in red. Ropes are tuned and smug on their hooks. Watch terms are set. Curtain language fluent. Propriety's border patrols in place. Herbs hold the line against the evidence of noses. Licenses flutter. Badges and tallies sleep together without complaint. And now the season itself presses its stamp on your night. The door barred against rain, the loft heavy with harvest, the benches earning their bed degrees. 2 to a tick becomes the town's pulse, faster in fair week, slower in Lent, steady whenever the road breathes people toward the door. At last, you fold into your allotted geometry. Outside, a gust tells the signboard to sing. Inside, a juror whimpers that the plaintiff stole his pillow, then wakes, realizes he is the plaintiff, and surrenders the evidence. Your bedfellow nudges the warm brick into its station at your feet. The dog anchors the blanket where diplomacy failed, and you let the season's argument with the world reduce to a hush inside the curtain. A small autumn, a local winter, a microclimate named enough. Wealth changes the weather of the night. You feel it the moment a porter swings open a door to a private chamber, and the air has opinions, warmer, quieter, perfumed on purpose instead of by compromise. The bed doesn't lurk along a wall. It presides, a small architecture of wood and fabric with a canopy that makes its own sky. The ropes are already tightened by hands you never see. The sheets are real linen that sigh when you touch them. The blanket is not a debate but a decision. In here, 2 to a bed is policy only if you brought your spouse. Everyone else sleeps in the story's margins. You pause at the threshold and learn that privacy is a staffed illusion. A maid glides in with a warming pan that skates under the covers like a little comet. Another shakes out a feather bolster that remembers pleasant clouds. A third sets a shielded lamp where drafts can't flirt. Behind the curtain's edge crouches a truckle for the servant who will collapse after the last candle bows. Even solitude has witnesses. The dog, promoted to respectful distance, circles twice and chooses the hearthrug, a diplomatic posting with full sniffing privileges and zero policy input. A mainstream historical fact lays its hand on the carved bedpost. By the later Middle Ages in prosperous homes, the bedchamber often doubled as a semi-public audience space. Inventories list featherbeds, testers, and rich bed curtains. Walls wore tapestries that were not only art, but insulation. Portable walls that warmed stone and advertised silk, wool, and power. The best bed appears in wills by name with its bolster and sheets, capital and theater folded together like a well-made coverlet. No wonder a chamber like this knows how to be seen even when the door is shut. Hot bricks arrive wrapped like gifts and are slid to the foot. Central heating, medieval edition, minus the part where it heats the center. The maid tests the ropes with the bed key, giving them a quarter turn that feels like a nod to good housekeeping rather than a fix for sagging democracy. A ewer sits on a stand. The water is warm enough to make your hands confess they're human. A close stool hides discreetly behind a screen, proving that even luxury must negotiate with gravity. Travel magnifies the gap. You've seen rich merchants and petty nobles arrive with personal linen chests, their sheets marked with a stitch device so they won't have to trust a stranger's wash day. Some bring portable bed curtains, rods that clamp to a tester or a rope so they can unfold a familiar microclimate wherever coin allows. Quirky tidbit, whispered with the relish of a chambermaid. A few elite travelers keep a tiny box of sleep powders, comforting sachets of crushed rose, violet, and benzoin, to sprinkle on pillows for the easing of spirits. Does it cure sleeplessness? Perhaps. Does it cure the idea of sleeplessness? Frequently. The dog recommends the simpler remedy of a good ear scratch and remains skeptical of benzoin's bacon content. Money buys more than softness. It buys control of time. Out in the common room, you bent to curfew bells and the hearth's rationed arithmetic. In here, the clock is private. Candles enough to make midnight a hobby, servants enough to make dawn negotiable. If you want matins in a whisper and lauds a little late, the chamber's ritual can be tuned like a lute. You might even be fitted for nightclothes of fine linen instead of sleeping in the day's shirt. Less draft, more dignity, fewer negotiations with buttons in the dark. Yet privacy blurs at the edges. A lady's maid sleeps in the truckle. A groom curls near the door in case a message gallops in. The chaplain's pallet is 2 rooms away, and his cough travels famously. Historians still argue whether medieval elites experienced privacy as we imagine it, walled solitude valued for its own sake, or whether the bedchamber remained fundamentally social, a stage for graded access where closeness to the sleeper measured closeness to power. Tonight your curtain says, alone, but the corridor hums with someone else's footsteps anyway. Solitude is curated, not absolute. Textiles preach a sermon of class you can read by touch. Your fingers meet damask and say, the valance falls with gravitas. The tassels look like small, expensive arguments that all end in your favor. A cabinet holds napery folded like good behavior. And a chest breathes out a trace of cedar to keep moths from eating the inventory. When the maid draws the bed curtains, the room inside warms by a season. Drafts become rumors, and your breath discovers it can be decorative. The curtain taps the old beat. A handspan of decency here widens luxuriously without stealing anyone's share. Sound itself gets edited. Where the common hall let the watch's hour call print tidy commas on your sleep, this chamber swallows consonants, so even a late murmur wears slippers. You still place the purse under the pillow. Habit can be aristocratic, but the gesture feels like an echo of prudence rather than a current event. The dog, sensing your guard lower by half an inch, scoots his paws onto the fringe of the rug and pretends this counts as lying outside. Wealth nags, because comfort always does. Too many candles flatter the ceiling into growing sooty flowers. A warming pan is a gold-plated fire hazard if a sleepy maid lingers. Soft beds hide loud consciences. You catch yourself missing the honest chorus of the common room, the blanket diplomacy, the whisper taps, the dog adjudicating borders with a tail. In a private chamber, the jokes are quieter and have worse timing. Another plain fact straightens its cuffs. Sumptuary laws in some realms tried to leash who could buy which fabrics and furs. The bedchamber felt those leashes lightly, but display, tapestries, embroidered hangings, still obeyed the politics of seeing and being seen. A merchant might sleep like a minor prince on the road, yet at home his curtains told a story calibrated to guild inspectors and neighbors with eyes. The innkeeper, who can read a curtain's accent the way others read a face, prices accordingly. Historians still argue whether the heavy architectural four-poster, fully canopied and curtained on all sides, belongs squarely to this moment in every region, or whether many places kept to simpler frames with rods and hangings for longer, letting the full theater of sleep arrive later. You, having now lain under both, decide chronology is secondary to physics. What the rich consistently buy is more fabric and better closure, a thicker wall of softness between their breath and everyone else's weather. Fabric is the medieval spell for not tonight. Before the lamp goes low, the maid performs an invisible audit. Shutters latched, ember banked, candle cup ready. She places a handbell within reach, a little silver moon you can ring if the world misbehaves, and vanishes like a punctuation mark at line's end. You draw the curtain all the way, because here you may, and discover a new silence that has opinions about dreams. The dog lifts his head once, quality control, then sighs in the universal language of approved. You think of the people still settling in the hall beyond these planks, of badges and fares, watchmen and herbs, arithmetic and etiquette, and the joke wealth tells itself becomes clear. You can buy distance, but you still sleep one body at a time. The curtain glows with borrowed fire. The feather bolster learns the shape of your stubbornness, and morning waits like a polite servant just outside the fabric. You close your eyes and let the soft machinery of class complete its work, turning coins into quiet until the dawn remembers your name. Stories hatch after lights out the way moths find a candle that thought it was safe. A murmur travels the room, thin as steam, and collects in little covens of breath behind curtains. Your bedfellow, who speaks fluent drowsy, starts with weather, the kind of harmless sky talk that warms the mouth, then slides, with the competence of a man who has walked too many miles with the same knees, into the things that move when doors are barred. The dog lifts his head, as if to say, I will allow this programming, and the hearth, down to its patient vowels, becomes a storyteller's drum. This is where a bed shared with a stranger turns into a tent for folklore. You trade the sort of confessions that don't cost coin, bridges that groan under invisible processions, a hill 2 valleys over that answers to its own name if you call it wrong. A light above the fens that beckons walkers into water. A woman across the room adds, softly, the trick of keeping a broom by the door so anything uncanny must stop and count the straws. Busy work for beings with obsessive etiquette. Your bedfellow snorts. The dog, accountant by temperament, approves the counting. A mainstream historical fact wipes its boots and sits down. The word nightmare doesn't begin as a horse at all, but as the Old English mare, a crushing night hag or goblin believed to sit upon the sleeper's chest. Variants bloom across Europe, Alp, Mara, Cochamar, and sermons, medical texts, and preachers' story collections pass the tale along with tidy morals and useful shivers. Half this room has woken at least once with a chest full of anvils and blamed something with fingernails made of ideas. You stroke the blanket and assure it you know the difference between linen and ghosts, but you also slide a hand to the purse knot because reality likes props. The curtain turns into a stage. Inside yours, the cast is simple. You, your bedfellow's careful elbows, the cooling brick at your feet, and the dog with his ears set to priest of small alarms. Outside, the taproom hums with midnight genres, pilgrim miracle, merchant cautionary, friar's moral, carter's boast. Once, says a voice near the stair, I carried a sack that snored. Laughter wanders through the rushes and settles on pillows like friendly dust. The innkeeper lets it run for a while, and then trims it with a glance, the stage manager of everyone's dreams. Your bedfellow, having tested your tolerance for absurdity, leans into sincerity. He passes along the pocket remedies travelers love because they pretend to protect you. If you suspect the will-o'-the-wisp, turn your coat inside out. Confusion confuses. If a night hag rides your chest, recite Psalm 4 until she has to listen. If something slips under your blanket and will not mind its manners, call it by the wrong saint's name. Offense is binding law in the world of shadows. You file these under effective as lavender, and decide the real protection is going to bed with a pact and a dog. A carter clears his throat and gifts the room the kind of saint story that never tires. He swears that once, walking a bad river with worse weather, a huge shadow with a small hat kept pace on the bank all night, and the ford was friendly for once. He does not claim a miracle, only a good crossing. Which is exactly how saints should be used, mile markers with better stories. The dog, who believes in saints that smell like bacon, signs off with a tail thump. Quirky Tidbit tiptoes in wearing felt slippers. Some sleepers tuck a crust of bread beneath the mattress, so the dead will eat politely and go. A superstition tidy enough to please innkeepers who prefer their hauntings housebroken. Others stitch a tiny cross of thread into the pillow corner, invisible but official. A more modern-minded mason swears by placing shoe soles toward the door to show bad dreams the exit. He adds that it helps with early departures and claims perfect punctuality. You consider adopting the shoe stratagem, if only for the punctuality. Fear organizes itself into weather you can predict. At midnight the talk tilts toward roads that lose their maps. By 1 o'clock it favors barns with extra footsteps. Near 2 it arrives at the wild hunt. That riot of riders and hounds no one can watch without catching a cough in the soul. A pilgrim swears he heard horns. A friar swears he heard cows. Historians still argue whether such tales were sincere reports of nocturnal processions, literary commonplaces sharpened by winter, or a kind of curfew propaganda dressed in antlers, useful for keeping people indoors when the watch preferred quiet streets. In your bed, The category matters less than the function. Stories make the dark legible, which is half of safety. Another fact sits up and adjusts its spectacles. By the later Middle Ages, exempla collections, tale compendia for preachers, circulated widely, seeding taprooms like this with ready-made parables that could be trimmed and retold until they sounded homegrown. That's why the ghost at the bridge sometimes knows Latin. He's been to church more than you have. You can hear the difference between the friar's careful cadence and the carter's barn-born grammar, and you like them both. One sands the edges, the other leaves splinters for grip. You tune your breathing to the room's hush and notice how bed-sharing edits fear. Alone, a creak is a thesis. With company, it's a footnote. Alone, a draft is a fate. With a blanket treaty, it is merely weather. The dog's weight on the hem of the coverlet makes an argument any demon would have to respect. This border is claimed. You squeeze the purse knot under your cheek, not because you suspect anyone here, but because ritual is how hands talk you down from cliffs your mind built during the afternoon. The hearth gives a pop that sounds very much like a small hoof on a little bridge in a story. 3 heads turn in unison, including yours, and 3 smiles arrive a second later, including the dog's, which is mostly eyes. Someone whispers, "Coal hag," granting the ember a title. Someone else counters with "Saint's knuckle," which is frankly ambitious branding for charcoal. The laugh that follows is the kind that lowers shoulders and raises blankets. The inn, satisfied that everyone has paid their fear tax in anecdotes, lets the room tip toward true sleep. Before your eyes fold, you offer one story of your own, a small one to match the broom and the bread. When I cannot sleep, you say, I count down the night's rituals, bar on the door, quiet under the cup, purse knot under the pillow, warm brick at the feet, curtain drawn to kindness, dog on the border. And by the time I reach the last reaches me. Your bedfellow calls it a litany disguised as architecture and approves the theology. The dog, now fully named as the Saint of Thresholds, breathes one contented syllable that smells faintly of stew and office. You let the last rumors of the hunt run by outside like weather you do not own. The broom leans. The bread waits to be politely ignored. The shoe soles point the way out. The purse is a small planet under your ear. If anything monstrous wants a word, it will have to whisper through herb-scented linen, past licensed quiet, and under a curtain with jurisdiction. Your eyes close on a moral that isn't trying too hard. The night is a democracy once the stories are told. Illness perches on the rafters like a quiet crow, counting. You feel it in the way laughter shortens by a syllable, in the way people aim their coughs into cloaks, in the way your bedfellow turns toward the curtain seam to sneeze and apologizes to the fabric as if it drew up house rules. Sharing a bed buys warmth and watchfulness. It also buys proximity. The arithmetic you've done all night, blankets, embers, elbows, now includes breath, and you balance it against the alternative. Shivering alone under a shuttered sky where the gate is barred and the ditch rehearses pneumonia in frog. The inn fights back with choreography. A bowl of vinegar water sits near the counter for rinsed hands and wiped trenchers. A kettle mutters at a clean boil so spoons can take a quick scald between owners. Rushes near the hearth are raked and replaced with a seriousness that says this is not cosmetics, this is housekeeping with teeth. The apprentice has been promoted to door sneeze monitor, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. The dog, master of borders, quietly relocates when a cough refuses to mind its manners. No offense taken. all offense avoided. A mainstream historical fact steps in wearing a harbor master's cloak. Late medieval port cities began imposing formal quarantine. In 1377, Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, required newcomers to wait outside the walls for a trentina. 30 days later lengthened toward 40. And by 1423, Venice had a permanent lazaretto on an island where ships, cargo, and people could stew in safety before stewing together in town. You are not on an island. You are in an inn that borrows the principle with curtains, fresh air by inches, and a kind of soft inspection that watches faces for fever and stories for missing pieces. Moralists and medics split the room in polite halves. A friar suggests that vice invites visitations, too much ale, too little prayer, you know the list, and recommends a fast and a better relationship with commandments. A clerk counters with bad air and blocked drains, clean ditches, swept lanes, and fewer windows being treated like chutes for enthusiasm. The innkeeper nods at both while wringing out a cloth. She believes in saints, soap, and schedules, ideally in that order. You sip a cautious posset and decide all three taste like common sense. Quirky tidbit arrives on a chain. The merchant's wife clicks open a tiny silver pomander. A pierced apple stuffed with clove, cinnamon, and a whisper of ambergris, and holds it beneath her nose whenever the conversation turns medical. Keeps the air good, she says, which is also what curtains do when drawn to kind widths, and what windows do when wedged a finger to the night. A more frugal neighbor lifts a nosegay of rosemary and rue, the budget model, and claims courage. You try both, strictly for science, and declare the experiment statistically comforting. The dog prefers bacon. The room edits its habits. Cups stand a handspan farther apart on the trestle. Blankets get shaken outside with little fanfares of dust and denial. The warm brick at the bed's foot becomes even more beloved because it delivers heat without traffic. Someone proposes propping the shutter. Someone else recalls that the watch prefers fewer shadows moving after curfew. Compromise wins, as it often does here. A narrow wedge of air, a candle kept low, and feet that learn the quietest way to the ewer. You inventory your small defenses the way travelers tap pockets. Herbs in the tick. Soap where water cooperates. A purse knot under the pillow because ritual calms hands that might rub eyes. Whispered rules about sharing that cut down the number of tours across the room. You draw the curtain to a courteous handspan and feel the microclimate settle. Your breath, your bedfellows, the dogs, and a lavender sachet doing its optimistic best. Safety will never be absolute. It can, however, be organized. Historians still argue whether the Great Plagues rode mainly on rat fleas, or whether human ectoparasites, body lice, and human fleas mattered more than textbooks once admitted, especially when cold snaps thinned rats and crowded people indoors. They also hedge on how much bed sharing itself raised risk compared with the shared air of halls, markets, and devotions. The debate thrives in footnotes. You live in practice. You keep your distance where kindness allows. Close the curtain where weather insists, and bless whoever invented washing bowls you can carry. Reputation is medicine. A house known as ill-bedded, not merely lumpy but dangerous, loses custom faster than fleas jump. Merchants remember, and pilgrims repeat. The innkeeper knows this. She airs blankets on clear mornings, beats ticks like drums of confidence, and, when rumor outpaces laundry, closes the loft to let the beams have a good stare. The pause is part of the cure. It tells worry that adults are presently in charge. Not every remedy is vinegar and virtue. A peddler swears by thieves' vinegar, a fierce infusion of rosemary, sage, and bravado. An old drover recommends sleeping with a slice of onion by the window, so the bad air will marry it instead. A mason displays a ring with a toadstone he claims will darken in the presence of poison, and decides it also darkens around people who sneeze. None of this would pass in a scholar's hall, but much of it will pass a worried hour between coughs. The room allows for hope dressed as hardware. Rituals smooth the anxious edges. The apprentice boils mugs between servings and looks pleased with his steam. The friar mutters a brief blessing that manages to cover both stew and lungs. The clerk copies a list of names in the ledger, so the watch can wake to order rather than panic. You consider your own part. Cough into cloth, fingers away from face. Fewer jokes that require spittle. More jokes that can be told with eyebrows. Small courtesies turn into public health when performed together. Another hard fact pulls up a chair. Town books show attempts at street cleaning, burial protocols, bans on crowded processions during outbreaks, and the sudden appearance of wardens tasked with knocking on doors that stayed too quiet. Some measures likely helped. Others mostly moved worry from one lane to the next. The inn translates edicts into nightly housekeeping. Fewer candles milling about. More hands busy with basins. And an agreed bedtime that makes dawn arrive to a quieter floor. You make your peace with the wager. Outside, cold stones and a locked gate. Inside, warm breath and rules that keep it from getting ambitious. You choose inside, with people, with curtains and courtesy. The dog settles on the hem of the blanket as if stamping a charter. This border holds. Your bedfellow turns away to cough and murmurs, "Thanks, you don't need." The hearth sighs a vowel that could mean anything soothing. You place your palm on the cooling brick. Think of the lazarettos across the sea and the handbell within reach of your pillow, and accept that safety, like sleep, is a practice. By the time the candle gives up its last sensible inch, the room has learned a calmer grammar. Bowls have taken their turn in steam. The floor smells faintly of rosemary and resolved arguments. A pomander swings once and comes to rest. You slide down into the warm geography you share, not careless, not frightened, just disciplined enough to let your lungs forget they were doing math. If illness is on the rafters counting, it can count this too. Vinegar, water, cloth, distance, kindness, and a quiet door that knows exactly how to close. Dawn doesn't burst, it loosens. The dark thins to a slate wash at the window seam, and the room remembers, one joint at a time, that it was built for movement as much as for sleeping. You wake in the geometry you earned, purse knot warm under your cheek, brick at your feet only softly alive, curtain still holding its treaty line, the dog anchoring the border like the small saint he is. Your bedfellow blinks, tests his elbows for diplomacy, and offers the greeting of people who slept responsibly. A nod, not a sentence. The house performs a quiet unfurling. Curtains lift in handspans, not flourishes. Boots find feet without reporting the event. Cloaks come down like weather remembered correctly. Near the hearth, the apprentice coaxes embers into a breakfast flame that makes yesterday's stew pan confess future possibilities. The innkeeper appears with a ledger smile and the kind of voice that carries only as far as the person it needs to reach. The commonwealth of blankets converts itself back into the commonwealth of errands. Your palate becomes a bench again, then a story about a good night. Reckoning is an art. A mainstream historical fact takes a chair at the counter. Across medieval Europe, From kitchens to the royal exchequer, split tally sticks tracked debts and payments. One notched stave broken into matching halves so account and receipt could prove each other later. Inns are less ceremonious but just as practical. Chalk on a door, notches in a memory, and coin on the plank settle stew, ale, and a rectangle of sleep. The innkeeper's fingers move like an abacus. She totals the bed you borrowed, the hot bricks cameo, and the second mug you definitely needed, then subtracts a favor you earned by helping shift a barrel. Your purse, having survived the night by being under your head, now practices generosity by being elsewhere. Around you, the room breathes logistics. Merchants weigh promises against distances. Pilgrims inventory badges against roads. A clerk rehearses indictments in a whisper, as if trying not to wake the law. The bar rises. The latchstring smiles again at daylight. The watch outside hands the street back to people who prefer puddles in the plural to staffs in the singular. You test your pack straps, pat the bed frame with a grateful palm, and give the curtain one last affectionate pinch for keeping the weather where it belonged. Quirky tidbit, tender as steam, hovers near the hearth. Some houses offer a morning sop, stale bread softened in ale or warm milk, meant to square last night's accounts with the stomach and send travelers into the day carrying proof that kindness can be liquid. Your bedfellow calls it pocketable courage and pockets it in his mouth. The apprentice calls it quality control and repeats the experiment twice. The dog, who considers himself a registered charity, receives a crumb and files the receipt as a wag. You practice the choreography of departure. Fold the blanket, shake the tick so herbs remember their job, check for stowaway saints in the sheet. None today. Though you leave a thread of lavender for the next stranger who needs the idea of clean as much as the fact. Boots aligned, you sweep a last glance across the room to see who needs a hand. The merchant's wife has her trunk, the friars have their psalms, a carter has a wheel and a hope. The innkeeper catches the glance and nods, the official seal on your citizenship. Payment finished, you slide a coin back across the plank for luck, small change against large weather, and the innkeeper returns change and advice. The ford is shallow by noon. The bridge becomes philosophical before that. The tollman has a sense of humor, but not about axles. She adds a quiet blessing, unlicensed but effective. The dog stamps his own consent by touching his nose to your wrist, an audit you're happy to pass. Historians still argue whether early morning travelers usually broke their fast in the inn, pottage, sop, ale, or more often took the road at first light and ate at the first market they reached, a habit that varies with purse, season, and how far the watch has pushed everyone indoors the night before. Practice suggests a compromise, a swallow of warmth to persuade your courage, a heel of bread to bribe the miles, and a promise to your knees that the first milestone is only as far as the second. Names get traded like coins worn smooth by use. Your bedfellow offers the part of his that fits a morning. You return the part of yours that prefers short roads. Neither of you demands the rest. A handshake closes the account opened under the blanket. If fate is feeling theatrical, your paths will cross by a different fire with the same dog in spirit, if not in fur. If not, you'll recognize each other anyway inside the courtesy of strangers who already know the choreography. The inn has its own postlude. Windows open a finger to let night out in clean ribbons. The apprentice sweeps the floor as if removing last evening's punctuation so the day can start a new sentence. Ropes on the bed you used get a ceremonial quarter turn from the key, preparing for another pair of travelers who will arrive damp, hopeful, and ready to learn what you learned, that a bed can be a bridge, and a curtain can be a treaty that holds until dawn. You step into the morning. The signboard creaks its benediction, fruit painted bright against weather, and a bird draws a line across the sky that might be prophecy or just hunger. Behind you, the door closes with the confidence of a house that kept its oaths. Ahead, the road practices being a sentence you are ready to read again. Verbs for feet, nouns for milestones, conjunctions for bridges that say and. You touch your purse knot out of habit, scratch the dog out of affection, and carry with you the simple, exact truth you came to learn. Sometimes strangers share a bed so that morning has enough people in it. Let the house fade now. The rush is still. The ember turn from red to quiet memory. You have paid your reckoning, folded the blanket with a last grateful press, and stepped into a morning that doesn't need to hurry. Let the signboard's gentle creak soften into a lullaby you can keep in your pocket. The road will wait. It always does. Breathe in the softer air, the kind that lives inside curtains and kind voices. Feel the small weight of the purse not relax, no longer a watchman, just a shape that says you took care of yourself. The bed ropes are already tightening for someone else. The lavender thread you left behind is doing its small, fragrant work. The warm brick at your feet has forgotten its name. Good. Let objects become simple again. Let muscles put down what they held so well. Imagine the dog finding the square of sun by the hearth and curling there. Border saint off duty, one paw draped over the edge of the rug like a signature. Imagine the apprentice opening the door a handspan to invite a clean stripe of light across the floor. Imagine the innkeeper resting her palm for a moment on the bedpost, as if blessing the night that did its work, and the day that will. Now let your breath lengthen into slow tide. In, like a curtain drawing warmth closer. Out, like a lantern lowered under a cup. In, like a soft step on old boards. Out, like a quiet door, sure of its latch. If thoughts try to travel, give them a small inn of their own. One hearth, one cup, one easy bed, and let them rest there while you drift. The watch is walked, the law is satisfied, the stories are told, and morning, when it comes again, will be gentle enough to meet you where you are.